Shazam!
Hello guys and welcome back to Rewind Reviews. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the first DCEU movie to come from 2023, and that is Shazam! Fury of the Gods. In the follow-up to 2019's Shazam, Billy Batson is struggling to maintain the foundations of the Shazam superhero team when they begin to drift apart. But when the Daughters of Atlas come searching for a mystical MacGuffin, Billy and the rest of the Shazam family must come together to face this powerful threat. Directed by David F. Sandberg and written by Henry Gayden and Chris Morgan, Shazam! Fury of the Gods stars Zachary Levi, Asher Angel, Jack Dylan Grazer, Rachel Zegler, Adam Brody, Grace Caroline Curry, Lucy Liu, Helen Mirren, Martha Millans, Cooper Andrews, Jimon Hansu, Faith Herman, Ian Chen, Jovan Armand, Ross Butler, DJ Cotrona and Megan Good. When it comes to the first Shazam movie, I actually really liked it overall. I think out of a lot of the DC movies that have been coming out over that course of time, especially within DCEU or Worlds of DC or Snyderverse or whatever it is you want to call it, Shazam definitely was one of my favourites. I do think that it was the right sort of balance of everything that you really sort of need from this particular character. The Snyderverse had kind of gained a bit of a reputation for being quite dark and a lot more mature and aggressive, and for me it was just a really nice breath of fresh air to actually have something that was a bit lighter and a little bit more fun and, you know, a bit closer to the comics. I don't mind the Snyderverse overall, but I've got to be honest, those movies did leave a lot to be desired, and the fan base is an absolute joy to interact with. And with the recent announcement of James Gunn taking over as the CEO of the newly formed DC Studios, it means that the Snyderverse era of the DC universe is slowly starting to get phased out, and Shazam! Fury of the Gods is the first movie to come out in 2023, and this is going to be the final year that we get anything within this universe. So quite literally this is the beginning of the end for the DCEU. And when it comes to my overall anticipation for this particular movie, I've got to be honest, I was kind of looking forward to it. They definitely set up a few elements that I was quite looking forward to see being explored in this movie. The post-credit scene for the first movie did suggest that we were going to be seeing Dr. Sivana and Mr. Mind teaming up to take down Shazam. So I was a bit surprised to see that actually they have absolutely nothing to do with this story whatsoever. I will admit I did have theories that maybe they would sort of tie into the story in some way, but they have absolutely nothing to do with this story whatsoever. It is a completely brand new story altogether. And when it comes to the story for this movie, it is basically just a gigantic MacGuffin hunt. They do try and add a bit more of a Greek mythology spin on it, and I do like those additions. The Greek mythology is a very big part of DC Comics, and I do like seeing that being explored in these movies. But the movie is literally just a case of these characters need this thing to do this, and that's what they need to stop, and this is happening, and that's really all the story really is. There is a very simple plot and premise to this movie, and that's basically what the first movie did as well. The reason the first movie really stood out to me was the fact that it focused on these characters and the family dynamic, and that is carried on over into this one. The heart of this movie is the dynamic between the Shazam family. So even though the basic premise of this movie is the gigantic MacGuffin hunt, the main story, the main emotional story is what's going on with the family, with the fact that the kids are starting to grow up, they are all starting to drift apart and want to do their own things. Billy's facing the prospect of potentially being kicked out of the foster home because he's aging out of the system. Mary, Freddie, the other kids, they're all starting to find different interests, they're all starting to find their own path in life. And I do like that they are taking that direction because, yeah, these characters are getting older. It is definitely a lot more noticeable now, and they have to kind of address it in this one, which is a bit of a problem when you are trying to make a film series focusing on a bunch of kids who become superheroes, because the longer you leave these movies, the older the kids are going to be. So it can cause a bit of an issue, especially when it comes to the casting, because the way that it worked in the first movie was when they turn into the superheroes, they turn into the best versions of themselves. I've always seen it more as it's the kids becoming the adult versions of themselves. So when it came to the casting process, it definitely made sense that they would cast somebody who was a little bit older than the kids so they could play the adult form, so you can kind of separate the two characters. So it made sense why Mary is like the only character who doesn't actually change at all. It's the exact same actress playing both the normal Mary and the superhero Mary. But where it gets a bit confusing is that Zachary Levi plays Shazam and Asher Angel plays Billy. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because Billy is turning 18 within this movie, or like he's a few months off from turning 18, so why does he look so different when he's an adult? And that extends to all the other kids as well, so it is a little bit confusing why it is that Mary is like the only one that doesn't. There's definitely been a lot of theories and potential reasons for it online, but I haven't really seen anything that's concrete. But when it comes to the performance of both Billy and Shazam, I do think that both actors do play their parts really well. I personally thought it worked quite well in the first movie because I thought it was quite an interesting dynamic having Billy being a little bit more mature because of everything that he's been through, and having Shazam, Captain Marvel, being a little bit more immature because he's finally getting to just sort of like be himself. He's getting to enjoy himself a little bit more, he's getting to just sort of go out and just have fun. And let's be honest, if you were a kid and you suddenly had the ability to turn into a superhero, you'd have as much fun as you could. But with Billy getting older in this movie, and the fact that he's maturing and he's taking on a leader role within the Shazam family, to me it would have made sense if the maturity of Billy sort of bled a bit more into Shazam and having him be just a little bit more mature. But they don't really do that. They still feel very similar to what they did in the first film. They have definitely evolved a little bit, they have changed a bit, there is definitely a bit more maturity here. I do like what they have done with that, but it does mean that the performances do feel a little bit more disconnected than they originally were. It does at times feel like Asher Angel is trying to be a bit more like Zachary Levi, and I do appreciate it, he does try and do that, but I do think that the character needs to be a bit more mature at this point in time. And circling back to what I said about the heart of this movie, a big part of that is the kids and the kids' dynamic with each other, and unfortunately the kids are barely in this movie. Like, they really do not have that much screen time. Majority of the time it focuses on the kids in their superhero forms. Like, even when they're just sort of hanging out in their cave, they are in superhero form throughout that entire time, which again, if you had the ability to turn into a superhero anytime you wanted, you probably would, but that does mean that we get much less time with the kids, and the kids were the biggest driving force of the first film. I do think that the family dynamic is still there. It is probably the most prominent thing in this movie, and I do like the chemistry that the actors do have with each other. They really do sort of bounce off each other, both the adults and the kids. And everyone's given a pretty good performance, but it does feel like some of the characters are given a lot more to do than others. Like Eugene and Pedro, they do have a couple moments here and there to really sort of show off what they can do, but that's really it. They don't really get much of a chance to really sort of be developed, to really sort of do much else. I thought Darla was pretty fun in the first movie, so I like seeing her having a slightly bigger role in this movie, and she honestly has one of my favourite lines of the entire film, which I definitely won't be repeating on here. Mary also gets a few moments to shine, but she doesn't really have that much to do, similar to all the other characters. But the most prominent character in this movie, at least like one of the most prominent kids in this movie, is Freddy. Jack Dylan Grazer was easily the standout of the first movie, and that is the exact same case in here. He is absolutely brilliant as Freddy. I love his performance. I think the dynamic that he has with his older self, played by Adam Brody, does feel a little bit more connected than a lot of the other characters. I feel like there is definitely a bit more of an overlap between who this character is as both the younger version and the older. It's also really great seeing Jimon Hounsou actually making a return in this movie as the wizard Shazam. I think he's a brilliant actor. I don't think he often really gets like the most prominent roles, but he is always great whenever he shows up. So it is really fun getting to see him come back into this movie, and I love his dynamic with some of the characters that he does interact with. He is one of my favourite actors, and it is really cool getting to see him have a bit more of an expanded role. When it comes to the rest of the supporting cast, I do think that everyone is really good in their roles, especially Rachel Zegler as Anthea. It is treated as a big reveal that she does have a bigger part to play in the plot, but based on everything that we've seen in the trailers, it was very obvious that she was going to be a key part in this. I'm struggling a little bit to really sort of know what it is that's a spoiler and what isn't, considering that the trailers were very spoiler heavy, like to the point where they show so much stuff. They basically give away the entire story, so I will do my best not to say anything, but it's going to be really hard if I'm featuring clips from it. And I'm finding it a bit weird why it is that Warner Brothers seem absolutely fine just showing all this stuff, like especially when it comes to like Black Adam. Like, they were very open about a certain cameo in that movie, to the point where it was like, that's not even a spoiler anymore because everyone knows it's going to happen. And even though they haven't been as open about certain things in this one, there is a trailer, I'm not sure where from, that does show something very significant, that if you've seen it and you're watching the movie, it'll be in the back of your mind, you'll know exactly what it is, to the point where you've got a big emotional scene, but you can't really be invested in it because you know what happens next. So I definitely think that somebody could do with having a word with the marketing team. Anyway, no superhero movie would be complete without its villains, and in this movie we've got Helen Mirren and Lucy Liu playing the Daughters of Atlas. Calypso and Hesperia are pretty menacing characters. They definitely have a really good presence to them when they show up. That's definitely aided by the performances of both actors, who both do a really great job. It really does help them feel like a genuine threat. I do like the sequences where they do interact with the Shazam family, and even though throughout the first section of the movie they do feel like they are going to be a pretty great presence throughout this film, they do feel quite underutilised, and they do start feeling a little bit more generic as the film goes on. They do get some pretty good scenes, there's some really good serious moments with them, as well as a few more comedic moments which are a little bit unexpected, but they do fit very well within this film. But I do think that they're not really that memorable as characters, and I really feel like they could have done a lot more with them, because they are sisters, they do have their own family dynamic, and I feel like that is a really great connection to the Shazam family, and I do think that there is a really good dynamic there to put them out confrontation with each other, and I just don't feel like they really sort of took advantage of that. One thing that I do actually quite like though is that, as usual, there is like this big sort of army threats that the superheroes have to go up against, but this time it's not necessarily like just a generic like zombie controlled sort of threat that they normally sort of go up against. These are all creatures from Greek mythology, things like minotaurs and cyclops and unicorns and all sorts. There's so many different characters and creatures in this movie. There is some really good imagination in here. The designs of them are actually pretty cool, especially when it comes to like the harpies and the minotaur, especially like all his armour and everything, because like, some of them do actually look pretty scary on screen. And that includes this dragon that has like just spikes all down its body, and it's actually made of wood. It is a really interesting design. I do like how it is represented visually. But most of these creatures only really sort of appear towards the later half of the movie, to the point where it's almost like they could have done a bit more with them. I feel like they could have had a bit more of a presence and a bit more of a threat to them. It just kind of feels like they're there just to kind of make up the numbers and sort of give everyone a bit more to do. And when it comes to the CGI work on them, some of them do actually look pretty good. I think that how some of them interact with the real people is actually not bad. I do think that there are some creatures and some sequences that are really good, but then there's others that do look very cartoony and I think could have been improved a bit more. But I'll be honest, I don't think there's anything that really sort of looks that bad in this movie when it comes to the effects work. Some of it is definitely noticeable, but I don't feel like it's enough to really kind of take it out the movie. But then there's other scenes where it genuinely does look really good, especially the finale, which takes place in like a baseball stadium. There's like lightning zapping all around them, and like visually it looks really good. It is ripped straight out of a comic page, and I do like that it is kept as simple as it can. I think David S. Sandberg is a really good director. I think that what he brings to this movie is really good. The visuals are great. I love the colours, they really pop, the way that it's edited, how they incorporate as many comic book panels as possible to sort of give it like that comic book feel. I know that his background is in horror movies, so he does inject a bit of that horror element into this one, which is very similar to what he did in the first one. I don't feel like it's as prominent as it was in the first film, but I do think that it is integrated very well in this one. But he knows how to keep the movie fairly light. This is still one of the lighter instalments of the DC universe. Unlike the first movie, there is definitely a lot of comedy that is injected into this. I don't think it's absolutely hilarious, but I do think that it does have some very funny moments and some really funny lines. I do feel like everything is balanced out very well. I do like that, unlike what the MCU's kind of been doing recently, they do make sure that anything that is emotional does try and land, that they do try and focus on the emotions in that moment rather than trying to cut away and making a joke. Whether you do find the movie emotional or not, that's completely a judgment call. I personally didn't, but I do think that overall, when it comes to a lot of the genres and a lot of the influences here and there, I do think that it is balanced out very well, much better than what a lot of the MCU movies are doing. And I do think that a part of that is because this is a very singular story. It's not trying to be a big setup for things in the future. It's not trying to just pay off everything from the past. This is more or less its own thing. I think you could watch this movie on its own without prior knowledge or need to see anything in the future in order to understand it and enjoy it. The driving force and heart of this movie is the family dynamic, and it is mostly handled well. I do think that it could have been improved at times, but I do think that overall it does work well for this film. But since the movie does focus more on them being superheroes, it does mean that we do get a lot more action in this movie. There's a lot more action sequences than there were in the first movie. They are handled well overall, but I do feel like they are a bit generic in terms of what traditional superhero movies tend to do, but they are fun, and I do think that there is enough variety that you won't get bored watching this. And one other thing that I would actually like to add into this is the costumes design for this movie, because the costumes are a little bit different than they were in the first film. I do like the design overall. I do think that they have captured the look of him in the comics really well and adapted it really well, and that does extend to the entire family. I do like how the Shazam family looks, the costumes that they have created for them, as well as Calypso and Hespera. I do think that the armour look that they do have is really cool. I do like that there is a lot of influence and inspiration from Greek mythology, and the armours that they would have wore around that time. I do question that when it comes to Shazam himself, why they needed to change the costume as much as they did, because there are definitely a few differences here and there from how it was in the first movie, and honestly I don't see why they needed to actually change it, because I think that they pretty much nailed it in the first film. But I don't mind how he looks in this movie. It doesn't look too different. You probably wouldn't really notice that much of a difference. And I do think that it is a really good interpretation of that costume. When it comes to the music for this movie, Christopher Beck comes in to do the score for this film. The score overall I think is alright. I do think that it is a little bit of an improvement over the first one, especially when it comes to the main theme. I didn't really think the soundtrack in the first movie was really that memorable, and yeah, I don't think the one in this one's that memorable either, but I do feel like it is a bit more suitable for Shazam, and I do think that for this film it does work overall and it does fit the movie. And that includes a lot of the songs that they choose to actually feature in this movie. Some of them are very cheesy, especially when it is that they're actually used, but they are good songs to actually feature in this movie. I do feel like the ones that they chose in specific scenes do work very well for those sequences. So overall the soundtrack is fine, but it's not particularly memorable. Overall, I think this movie is fine. It's a well-made film with a self-contained story that's easy to watch, and even though it does have a few moments where it does drag, the runtime is mostly breezy. There is a lot to like about this one, like the cast, the costumes, the visuals, the music, but I don't think it really stands out among the most recent superhero films. The story is pretty generic with some wasted villains. I can't help but feel like it could have been more. I did have fun with it though, and I would recommend checking it out if you can, especially if you're a fan of DC Comics or you're looking for something to watch with the family. It's not essential viewing, but it is harmless and I think you might enjoy it. So with all that being said, my rating for Shazam Fury of the Gods is a 7 out of 10. I'll be honest, I can't help but wonder what the movie might have been like if Black Adam and the characters from that movie were available to the team behind Fury of the Gods. Because very recently it has actually come to light that Dwayne Johnson, who plays Black Adam in that movie, kind of blocked a lot of these potential crossovers from happening, and it is really disappointing that that's the case now, because Black Adam is a Shazam character and those two characters kind of need each other. Dwayne Johnson actually blocked a cameo from Shazam in the Black Adam movie, and they were supposed to be characters of the Justice Society making an appearance in Shazam Fury of the Gods, which he also blocked, and I really don't understand why. I now understand why he kept insisting that the hierarchy of power in the DC universe was about to change, because he wanted to be in charge of everything. And speaking as a DC fan, I cannot see a DC universe where Black Adam is at the forefront of everything, because having Black Adam be the central antagonist of a Shazam movie would force Billy into a position where he needs to mature and become the hero that he has to be. I think that that could be a really interesting story, and it wouldn't be too far off what it is that they are trying to do in this film. He is an interesting character. He does have a very complicated history with these characters, but he is a Shazam villain. Shazam is the protagonist of that story, and he should be at the forefront of the Shazam franchise. And in terms of the DC universe, the ones at the forefront should be the main 7 of the Justice League. They are the pillars of everything in the DC universe. And hopefully with all those announcements of the upcoming DC projects, we potentially could get that. In terms of Shazam's big screen future, I don't really know what direction they're going to be taking going forwards, whether they're going to continue with this version of the franchise or if it's going to be rebooted in James Gunn's DC universe. There are 2 post-credit scenes in this movie. I'm not going to tell you what it is that they involve. What I will say is that they are something that probably are trying to plan and set up something for the future of Shazam, and I don't know if any of that stuff is really going to get paid off. So it does kind of feel a little bit pointless why those scenes are really in here, considering that they're more than likely probably not going to be leading to anything, which is a bit disappointing. That being said, I do think that it is great that we are going to start getting a newer rendition of the DC universe that does look like it actually has a planned out vision. I don't quite know how the next 3 movies within the DCEU are really going to sort of fit into everything, whether they are going to be kind of ignored going forwards or what, like The Flash, Blue Beetle, Aquaman the Lost Kingdom. But in terms of the upcoming slate of movies and TV shows that are going to be part of Gods and Monsters Chapter 1, I am actually really looking forward to a lot of the projects that are on the horizon, like the Lantern Show. We're getting a Superman Legacy movie, a Supergirl movie. There seems to be a lot of variety. It looks like we are going to get a bigger exploration of the DC universe that we never really got the chance to do before. And best of all, it is going to be connected together a little bit more coherently. I do have faith in James Gunn. I do think that he has done some absolutely fantastic movies over the years, and especially what he managed to do with the Guardians of the Galaxy, turn them into like characters that nobody had really heard of, and making them into not only very well known characters in Marvel Comics, but turning out one of the best MCU films. So I am really excited what it is that he's going to bring to the DC universe, because he does look like he has a lot of love, a lot of passion for these characters. He is known for taking smaller, unknown characters and bringing them into the forefront. So I am looking forward to seeing what he can do with a lot of these other characters. Yes, I do have a couple reservations, especially when it comes to his style of humour, because he's going to be writing and directing Superman Legacy. I am looking forward to it. I think that his directing style is absolutely fantastic. His writing style is really good. He does get to the core of the characters really well. He does provide a lot of heart into the story, but his humour can often get in the way, and I don't know if his sense of humour would really fit Superman. Comedy is a good part of Superman to sort of lighten the character up a little bit more, but in terms of James Gunn's style, I feel like it does need to be either toned down or tweaked a little bit to fit the style of Superman a bit more, and that's really the only reservation I've got with Superman so far. But other than that, I'm really looking forward to seeing what the future of the DC universe is going to look like. And while it is a shame that we're probably not going to get the payoff to a lot of these other movies that have been released recently, I am happy that we are starting to move forwards and we are going to start getting something new. So we'll see how all that turns out. Well, that is pretty much everything I've got to say for today's review, so thank you so much for watching. If you've seen Shazam! Fury of the Gods, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it. Also, let me know what movies and TV shows you're looking forward to in regards to the DC universe. If you're enjoying this content, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. Also, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you'd like to see me do, let me know down in the comments. This channel's been going for almost a year now. I've got something special planned for the next video getting released, so make sure you keep an eye out for that. And I've also got a lot more Rewinds on the way. So until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.